Welcome back. And I'm going to kind of build from where I stopped last time with thinking about stories and how two seemingly very different populations may get to understand how to get along with each other. So I kind of precipitated this by introducing the story of Queen Sheba and King Solomon and trying to understand. I mean, if you don't already know the ending, I'm not going to spoil it for you. I'm actually going to allow you the time to kind of build your own understanding from maybe the Quran or whatever sources you kind of rely on to understand the narrative around those two figures. And I'm going to kind of hold back and let you kind of draw a parallel from their stories and bring it to kind of a postmodern perspective. And I'll revisit them maybe in the future. And I want to do this almost as a way of enabling people to understand the beauty in having metaphor. So I built kind of like a mini story just to say, well, what is a good story, and like what are the components of a good story? And for me, it's always one that leaves me with like a project. So it's almost like it's so open ended that it's relatable to me regardless of like what my situation in life is. And then it asks me a question, and then I have to kind of think about it. I have to relate it to myself, and then it's like it gives me this can do attitude where like I want to go figure out how I can make this work in my life. And then there I go. So I've got a goal. So what I did was I got this from um, just Dollar Tree, which I think everybody's recognized as like everyone's favorite store. It's just like $1.50 for anything. And I had bought a prayer mat. So I don't, I told you, how do I do this? Where's the camera? Here you go. I, wow, this is like really bright. I don't even know how to do this, but anyway, maybe I can. Okay, well, maybe you don't have to read what it says. Maybe this way. Um, and there we go. It talked about prayer being a gift, which is something I'm kind of trying to create as an understanding that's, it doesn't have to be a formal practice. It's just understanding that you need to acknowledge that there's an existence outside of ourselves that's omnipotent, omniscient, and hears us and wants us to call on him. And he calls himself him. So giving us the language to kind of facilitate how to think. It's not really gender specific, as it were. So the reason that it's called the gift of prayer, it's almost like I'm glad that I am inspired to know how to think about my existence and what's going to support a happy existence, right? And that's it. So if you leave it at that, then you think, okay, I'm going to go back to the story of Cain, and I'm going to assume that from Cain to right now, like a minute ago, is basically all of his progeny, right? We don't know if Adam and Eve had separate children, and I mean, eventually they'll kind of intermingle. So anyway, we have Adam and Eve, and then we have the last me. Let's assume I'm the last child of Cain's progeny, or Adam and Eve's progeny. Abel hasn't come to life yet. Now, I kind of wrote down, uh, like, what would I be if I was Abel and I just woke up from sleep? So I put down a list of things that, if I just woke up and I can't remember anything other than that maybe I saw a bird, but then maybe that was my brother's consciousness, and then that's it. So then you think, okay, well, his closest remembrance is my parents, Adam and Eve, talking to me about a place that they used to be in and that they made a mistake and they're allowed to be forgiven. And to show appreciation for this existence in the world that tells us how to exist, we can be charitable. And by being charitable, we're almost allowing God to invite himself in and let us know to what degree are we being sincere with God, not to show off to other people, but we're basically trying to say, God, I want to do this for you. And can you show me the degree that you'll reward me because I'm being sincere and trying to love you and devote myself to you over and above anybody else. So you're the first person I'm calling on to help me before I try to make friends. So I put Abel and I said, okay, so let's assume I'm a person who I want to love God. I want to be charitable. I need to learn about how to voice how I feel. And I need to learn how to communicate how I feel. I need to learn how to build boundaries. I need to figure out how to make friends, how to keep them, how to stand up for myself, and how to stand up for them. And then I need to figure out what delayed gratification is and impulse control. So maybe the last thing I remember was like something hit my head and then that was it. So I never maybe really had a chance to test impulse control. Like maybe anything that I wanted, I was able to wait for. So if I'm planting seeds because I want to grow wheat, I know that, well, I can't make this go any faster. I can kind of like just find something else to entertain myself, and that's it. And then impulse control can also be what he did practice with his brother Cain, is that his brother was wondering, like, what do you have that I don't have? And why do you seem to have God's favor and I don't, or dad's favor and I don't? Cain didn't really stop to think about, like, well, how is that not true? Like, how do you come to that conclusion? Maybe that's not true. Maybe we both have equal favor, but we're just different in some ways and the same in other ways. But anyway, Abel was able to show that he was able to delay kind of retorting or kind of saying a mean thing back to his brother. He just said, um, this is what I've offered, and it looks like it was accepted. And then his brother replied, "Well, I'm going to kill you." So Abel replied, "If you try to strike me to kill me, I'm not going to do that. I know that that's not something that God would appreciate or reward." So that's delayed gratification. And it's also removing from himself the impulse to get angry or bully back. And then he was actually able to listen to say, I can see why you're doing this, but I have to stop and think that even if you are angry, I could be angry and defend myself, but I'm choosing instead to think of a higher purpose, which is, well, if God created me and he's giving me the reassurance that he can help me, then I'm going to let him help me out of this situation. And then we'll see how things happen. So let's assume that that's basically the scenario. We've been through like a very, very difficult history of violence and trying to understand what ultimate truth is, different religions saying that, no, we've got the ultimate truth. And then different people saying, well, I mean, maybe every single religion can have different variations of a truth. They don't necessarily all have to be antagonistic to each other. Sometimes they can kind of support each other. And here we are. So now it's Cain, and he's saying, I'll assume I'm Cain. And I want to say, oh, maybe I don't have an understanding of what God is. And maybe I need to learn something from Abel. Abel's back. So what would it be if I'm Cain? What would I want to know? So I gave a story, like I wrote a story, really, really short. And I want you to think about what it can inform. So there's a baby tiger, and it wants to understand why he has stripes and why lion cubs have plain fur. He decides to spend time with an adult lion and finds that, as males, they have big furry manes. Adult tigers don't have manes. So he stops to wonder why. He's wondering about noticing all these differences and decides instead to pause. So I'm going to stop there and ask you, what do you think are the similarities that he didn't notice? So we've got a lion cub and a tiger cub, and then we have an adult lion and an adult tiger. And let's assume I'm Cain and I'm a tiger. And I'm looking at this, I'm just observing because I don't have anything to read. I just run on instinct. And we can assume of humans now that we don't want to throw away scripture. We want to look at it. But before we think of a story, we almost want to think about how would we think about this? And then we want to read the story and then try to figure out, well, how can I compare what I thought versus what I actually read? And then how can I apply this to my life without wondering about whether or not my story, the scripture, are actually true historical narratives or not? Just what are they going to inform how I should live my life? So if we're thinking about, if I'm the tiger cub, I'm Cain, and I'm thinking about Abel, I'm still focusing on why are we different? Like, I'm not really thinking about how we're the same. And now I want to think about a goal that I should make. So I'm a tiger and Abel's maybe a baby lion. What goal could the two of us have, do you think? It's kind of a tricky question because it's almost like, well, you get to start over and I already have these stripes. Are these bad? Like, are these bad deeds that are showing up on my body? And he'll get angry and he might kill him again. And then you're just like, wait, I have to stop and think about a different way of thinking. So if you think, what am I? You can think, okay, I'm an animal. If he's a human, he could say, I'm human. But if he recognizes that I'm an animal, that's a cat. What is it about a cat? And some people understand about cats that they have a lot of personalities, which means they can learn so many things. they can unlearn so many things. They can decide who to be friends with, how to talk about being friends, what group of friends to have at what time. Like maybe at work, I wanted this group of friends. After school, I want this group of friends. After work, I want this group of friends. Maybe I go to school, then I go to work at the same time. Maybe I have like fun parties. So many ways to have one person who has all these different personalities because depending on where we are in the world, we are sometimes allowed to behave in certain ways and in others. So we know, for example, if we go to a temple, I went to a synagogue when I was at Carleton for part of a project, and you go in and there's just this kind of calm and it's just this quiet. And you already know that this is a place where a lot of people spend time worshiping and thinking about God because it's just so full of quiet. And you just sit there and you just want to, you don't even have to listen to anybody talk. You're happy to kind of just sit there and just think and maybe look at the arts. Right? Different than when you go to a recreation center where the adrenaline is always high. So you go there and you're already like, you can maybe hear music, you can hear people like if they're playing in a basketball court, you can hear the sneakers maybe screeching against the floor. Maybe if there's like an instructor giving a class, you can hear them instructing people and you can hear people like shouting and saying, yeah, we're excited that we're part of this group. And she's getting feedback from, how excited are they that they're able to kind of overcome an obstacle. Like sometimes they'll say, okay, for 2 seconds, we're going to do this really, really, really difficult interval, and then we'll relax. And everybody gets excited because they're like, okay, we know this is going to be really, really short, and then we're done. So all of this gets you really energized and it gets you in the mood, right? Very different from the other uh, environment. One is not better than the other. It's just that our body is allowed to be that diverse. Our mind is certainly that diverse, and so is our heart because we have so many different things that we love in the world. So now Abel is somebody who's very plain. He's just like, I don't even know what I like anymore other than that I love that I exist, that I'm here again. But maybe the similarity now could be Cain has plain uh, coat or fur, but he has stripes, which could mean maybe he has a little bit more knowledge about how to live life ethically. It's like I've made a lot of experiments. I've had so many mistakes that I learned from. So lots of trial and error. Maybe that's what these stripes are. And then he doesn't have to feel like he's always thinking about himself in a negative way, right? So then already right there, you think having an idea that God loves you already puts you in a mind frame to think positively about yourself rather than what is it that's wrong with me, right? If you think about it, what is it that's good about me? Then you're always looking for the positive and your mind's already thinking, well, it's cool. We're similar. We have the same kind of, I mean, I might be a little bit more orangey black. Your mane might be a little bit more yellowy, but that's cool. Like if I take off my stripes, we're kind of the same. And then from there, they already know that anything that they find over and above that is going to be added to character as it is. So now I'm going to give you an example of my life. So if I'm a female and I'm an introvert. So if I compare myself to a man who's an introvert, you can say, well, what's similar is that we're both introverts. So we're both quiet. Maybe we like to spend a lot of time doing quiet activities, right? How are we different is that he's a man and I'm a woman. So our bodies are going to look different unless we do surgery. And then we can notice that maybe we want to look the same. That's the story called transgender. Um, and beyond that, or before that, some women and some men have body types that don't necessarily form in any kind of particularly uh, discernible way. So some like for me, I wasn't until like I think it was 15 that I started developing my breasts. So it was like I could have looked like a boy if I cut my hair and didn't have my hijab on. So it's things like this where sometimes like we call them like I grew up thinking of myself as a tomboy, like having four brothers. Like I have kind of like a laid back, almost reserved existence and temperament. So if somebody kind of didn't succeed in engaging me in what hobbies maybe are characteristically popular amongst girls, they might have just thought maybe she wants to be a boy, maybe she wants to be someone who's transgender, right? And that's fine. Like back then in 1997, that would have been like a very new idea, probably not very welcome in a lot of places. Right now, it's very normal, and people are trying to understand it in a lot of different ways. It's not normal in some places still, and that's probably why it's important not to delay thinking about it and to kind of just, if the topic comes up, stop and think about it, and then at least know how to talk about it if somebody does ask you, and then you'll learn as you go. Now, that was one scenario. So, a female, and a male, but we're both introverts, right? So now think of female and a female and think of extroverts and introverts, right? So now she's a female, I'm a female, but she's very outgoing. She loves to do all kinds of adventurous activities. She loves going to parties. She loves giving speeches. She loves being the center of attention. Maybe she loves to make movies. So a very different personality than an introvert. Maybe I do like to do those things. Maybe I do like to do movies, but maybe the roles that I do in movies are very quiet ones. So here, these are skills now that we can build, being an extrovert and an introvert. Remember, it's something that is kind of tied to our nervous system. So it's almost like part of who we are genetically and our history. But we can learn to overcome the shyness that can kind of impede or almost hold us back. So because I'm also a shy person, it almost became very difficult for me to kind of if you think about turtle, like just to come out of the shell. Like I was always just kind of like happy to kind of just hang out in the background and just observe life. So if you think, okay, well the world's pretty safe now, like in a postmodern perspective, we can pretty much explore anything. What skill would I want to learn as an introvert from an extrovert? And the reverse. So what would an extrovert want to learn from an introvert? And then how could both of them actually be shy? Because shyness is a way of thinking that is it's different than an introvert because an introvert can just be somebody who's quiet, whereas a shy person is somebody who feels like they don't like to be in social gatherings, so they might have social anxiety. Somebody who has stage fright, somebody who always feels like people are focusing on them and judging them. So they're always almost their own eye. So it's almost like if you think of yourself watching yourself and judging yourself in a very harsh way. That's basically what shy people are. So knowing that God loves you and won't judge you and will actually help you help yourself and others kind of align with you in a helpful way helps you overcome shyness. So knowing that is almost why I don't really know how to bring in original sin as a way of almost augmenting how to think about positively seeing yourself. So if I say I'm a shy person and I think negatively about myself because my ancestors like Adam and Eve made a mistake and I'm still paying for it. You're always going to be thinking negatively about yourself versus they made a mistake, but they recovered from it. Cain made a mistake, he recovered from it. I make mistakes all the time. I don't know how to make friends. I'm learning. There you go. You already feel better about yourself because you're making healthy goals and you're able to achieve them, which gives you a sense of, hey, I did it, right? And then that's an intrinsic reward, which nobody has to tell you that you did a good job. You just feel good, and then you want to do more. So that's kind of what I'm talking about with this, is that whenever you have that sort of ambition or that kind of motivation to do something, we should always follow through with it because that's going to be our interest. And if we put it off, sometimes we lose that interest. And going with it is actually a good idea too, because it's usually an inspiration from an angel. And they come and go really quickly. So you want to kind of go with it and see, oh my gosh, like what can I explore? And then you'll discover. So the last thing I kind of want to mention is one of the things around building friendships, and for example, if we're thinking of Queen Sheba and King Solomon, is before before their kingdoms almost kind of uh, got to meet, what would have been something that Queen Sheba dreamed of and King Solomon dreamed of? I already kind of told you a little bit about both of them, um, but think of that when you're thinking about your friends and making friends. So if you already know that maybe I'm somebody who wants to be an explorer. So maybe I like to be somebody who travels and takes pictures and talks about the pictures on the internet. Already that's a dream that you value. And it might seem like you are more extroverted than introverted. Maybe you're a little bit of both because it's hard to be just one or the other. Now, let's see if you want to discuss having this dream with somebody who doesn't believe that should be allowed to travel. And they think, no, you should have friends and you should stay one place and traveling is not healthy. Would you want them as your friend? It's a very tricky question because usually you want friends who support your goals, don't always put you down because it makes it that much harder for you to be motivated. So if I have a friend who keeps telling me, no, it's not a good idea, I could say, it's it's funny that you have a different goal than me, but I like my goal. And then they might put you down and say, but that's a stupid goal. Like, why would people want to travel? You can just stay here. And you could say, well, I don't think it's a stupid goal. Like, it's pretty cool that I can travel here. And maybe after I've traveled here, I'd like to travel to other countries and see how other people enjoy life, right? So maybe they have a fear of flying, and that's why they're almost afraid to talk about that. Like, maybe you'll judge me if I say that I'm scared of something. So understanding sometimes how to engage with people who put you down is a skill that you can learn, but not don't push yourself too hard because sometimes when people bully, it's because they have a fear that they haven't acknowledged in themselves yet. And for other people to try to guess at it makes them even more defensive and they just want to pull back even more. So the best idea often is with bullying is uh, if somebody's having trouble with a goal that you're setting or a challenge that you're setting and you're trying to achieve and they're maybe somehow staying in your way, you can try to allow them to try the goal with you. But otherwise, maybe sometimes it's just best to part ways. From my own past, I haven't really had any bullies up front, but sometimes people just don't understand uh, your way of seeing, and you don't really want to enforce your way of seeing. Like you don't want to say, "This is the way I see, and I think you should agree with me." But it's almost maybe we can be friends, but kind of distant friends, so that we don't always have to kind of get in a fight. And maybe when you understand the way I see, and I understand the way you see, we can try to be friends again. So knowing that, you can almost relate that back to what we know of Solomon and Sheba before we get into that story is if they both know and they recognize because Sheba used to pray to the sun. So it's almost maybe she has a belief that that's the biggest thing in the world and it loves her because she's a queen. And um, maybe Solomon believes the same thing because he prayed, like, I want to have all this knowledge. I want a kingdom that's, more vast than anything that's ever going to come after me. So he believes that the universe loves him. So they already have something in common. Like they just love something about nature. And that's something that God loves because he tells us to contemplate nature. And actually, when we do pass away or we do sleep for a little bit before we wake up again, the earth and the skies actually miss us. Like God tells us when people who think about God or nature or the universe are not there anymore, like alive, it's almost like the heavens and the earth cry, like they're kind of sad. And you can think why, because it almost attracts the angels to earth, right? And if the earth we know is alive because we plant and it comes to life, then we wonder about like what about people who cause like this strife or these bullying? Like the earth probably feels it, and then maybe it doesn't want to grow plants and it just wants to kind of hide, and maybe the skies don't want to drop like rain because they just feel like we don't want to support this life. We want it to kind of go on and for people to be friendly again. So like how do we find those people that used to allow angels to come into the world? So knowing that is almost like that makes me feel better about myself and who I am. If nature all loves itself, then that's a really good thing. Let's try to understand more about that. And then you can understand what dogma is. And dogma is it's a consistent struggle, but it's almost like if I'm stuck on something that I think is important to believe in, because it's what I've been taught, but I don't know how to remove it from my life or to know that it's not something that's healthy for me to believe in, right? So if this bully thinks uh, traveling is stupid, right? Maybe they're not a bully. They don't think they're a bully. They just think I had a family member who died in a car crash when I was really little. So it makes me very sad and it makes me very angry about the universe. Maybe it was their mom or maybe it was their dad. So then you feel like, oh my gosh, if I had known that, I would have been maybe a little bit nicer about how I talk to them. And then you think, well, I guess it makes sense that they'd be afraid of traveling because they think, well, if my mom or dad didn't travel, they'd probably still be here with me. And then maybe I'd still have a mom and dad. And then maybe I would want to travel and I would want to see a lot of the world. So understanding all of that backstory helps us kind of think twice about why people are the way they are. And instead of judging right away, we can almost kind of wonder, like, what's causing your behavior? Like, why are you sad about something? Why are you angry about something? And then if they're welcoming to it, sometimes we can share a little bit about our worldview. Like some people understand that um, death is kind of final. So it's kind of like one of the things that we're fated to in a lifespan. Like we're going to die at a certain age. We're going to live this much, these many years in one lifespan because of the life that we had kind of built from before and the way we're kind of moving forward. So one belief is when people die at a young age, for example, in some communities, they have the faith and the belief that it just wasn't the right time for this person to live past, let's say, 20 years old. If they lived past 20 years old, maybe they would have had trouble with uh, drugs. Maybe they would have become really addicted. Maybe they would hurt themselves, hurt a lot of people with that. And it's just like they already built a positive life from the past that God wanted to prevent them from having to deal with that and bring that into their next lifespan. So it's actually a blessing for them. So young kids can sometimes have a hard time grasping that information because it's really abstract. They just want to understand, like, where did my dad go? Where did my mom go? Where did this person that used to take care of me go? Helping them with stories like this oftentimes can be a nice approximation because they tend to still have like this really rich imagination where boundaries between reality and stories is almost not there, and it's the way they make meaning to help them into an abstract world. So um, I just want to emphasize that bringing kind of existential narratives into a relationship, whether it's a friendship or an acquaintance, is something that we kind of have to kind of feel for ourselves. It's a very case by case kind of, I guess, case study as it is. I don't maybe call it as case study. It's almost like if I know that a friend is already hesitant about, talking about God and talking about biblical stories, I probably wouldn't want to be encouraged to discuss those unless they kind of initiate it. And then it's like, well, what if they don't? So then it's like, well, exactly. Sometimes it's just our demeanor that kind of becomes sort of telling of what we believe. And then people want to ask about it. So, if I'm somebody who used to pray at work, somebody will say, I don't see you praying anymore. What do you do instead? Right. And then that's almost like, I hope you're not offended. Like, I'm not judging you. I'm just curious about what you do with your time or what you think differently. Right. And having that kind of understanding of being able to do that almost informs why we want a postmodern approach about thinking about God, because it really tells everybody that whatever action you're doing is one that you actually want to do and you have a reasoning and a rationale for it. So that if people ask, you don't feel defensive or you don't feel like, wait, are you getting me in trouble? It's almost like, oh, I'm happy you want to ask and talk about it because you know what? I tried praying and I found that when I pray at work, it was almost like, it was just like an exercise. And it was just like, I'm glad I got it off my list and I can go and do something else. But right now I feel like, well, if I can't take a lunch other than, a certain time and it's maybe a time before or after prayer, or there's no place to pray, I can just maybe think about meaningful verses and that kind of helps me remember what I would have remembered in prayer. So allowing for that, I think kind of gives us a breath of fresh air, and we can kind of restart how we think about the universe. A lot of people have a lot of triggers around religion just because a lot of it's been kind of sort of like enmeshed with violence and assuming that there has to be one way of thinking so that we can all get along. But maybe now that we are more informed about how the world works and how the universe works and the diversity that exists within a lot of traditions, we can learn how to kind of build bridges. And then as we kind of replace or take out some of the dogma or some of the enmeshed values that we thought we had to kind of hold on to, we can think about how to replace them or augment them, right? So if I used to say I have to pray 5 times a day, I can say, well, maybe I'll try to just pray once in the middle of the day and then see how I do. And then if I feel like, oh, I actually kind of miss it, maybe I'll pray like in the morning and then the evening. And then, well, what else? And then during the day, maybe, I'll take 15-minute breaks. And if it's not enough time for me to pray, maybe I'll just do like a quick summary of something in my mind that reminds me of what I used to do in prayer. Because some people who have jobs like surgeons, for example, or people who have really um, time specific jobs where maybe they can't stop and take time out of their day to engage in something. God makes allowances for these anyway. So I don't want to give like this blanket recommendation that almost suggests one way is right and one way is wrong, but almost to say, because God allowed for uh, they're called licenses. So if I'm traveling, for example, and I know that it's a like a 3 hour drive, I can drive for maybe an hour and then realize, oh, if I don't pray right now, I'm going to miss one of my prayers. So I stop and I pray. And then I realize, oh my gosh, I'm in the middle of a highway. I could have caused a car accident. In this case, it's better to maintain your safety and then think about praying later. And God allows that. He says you can pray after you reach where you're going. So, and God loves us to have these allowances and to facilitate ease in life. So he always says, make things easy for people. Don't make things difficult and restrictive because then it becomes, we don't want to worship God. Like God says, he wants us to kind of think about him in a loving way and to come to him in a loving way. And he'll show us how to worship him and how to love him. And he says that, like, if you are trying to be conscious of God, he'll teach us how to be conscious with him. So if we focus on ourselves instead of focusing on others and how they're practicing, I think it just facilitates a better way of thinking about, how would we see Sheba and Solomon, two really massive kingdoms, and they have to come together without clashing or causing a war? Like, what would they do?